so we're going to talk about FRQ number 5, attribution for the AP Art History exam. Now, attribution is a very tricky skill. It's one of the hardest skills that we have in AP Art History. So what's going to happen in FRQ number 5, you're going to be provided an image or images of one artwork that's not from the 250. The purpose of attribution is to take a look at that art and identify who's it from, where is it from, what time period is it from. Always take a look at what specifically it wants because it's varied based on what they're looking for. Once you've identified who made it, etc., you're going to need to justify why you believe that. So you got to back up that choice. You can't just say, yes, it's from Japan because it looks Japanese. How? Explain. Then you're going to answer any additional questions related to the prompt. This is a short FRQ, so it's expected that you spend about 15 minutes on this. Don't get lost if you're like, I have no idea what artwork this could possibly be in relation to. Biggest thing is that you can still definitely get those last 2 points that are related to other questions. Even if you have no idea what the piece is, there are still points on the table. So the only way to get 0 points is to not answer the question. So to break it down, number 1, always follow the prompt. So read what it's asking, make sure you're answering those questions, and you can use the questions to help you kind of keep track of your task points and help you stay focused on the prompt. So if you restate the questions as sentence starters, that can help you make sure you're moving through the FRQ without spending too much time on one question or forgetting what the prompt is as you're just typing and you're going. So restating can really help guide you through this process. So now we're going to take a look at an example from the AP Art History exam from 2024. You can find all answers, guides, etc. on the College Board website. We're going to dive into this question, understand how to read the attribution questions with this example, and then how to answer the question and any trip-ups that might occur. So when we're looking at attribution, the one that we have here, image on the left, this is not from the 250. So now we need to look at the question and start thinking about who it could be, where is it from, etc. So reading the question, correctly attribute the work shown to the specific culture from the ancient Mediterranean in which it was created. So it's giving us the content area, but it wants the culture. So I don't need to know an artist in this case because we wouldn't know the artist, but we want that culture. Then next question, this is usually the same for almost all attributions, using at least 2 examples of specific visual evidence, justify the attribution by describing relevant similarities between the work shown and other work by the same culture. So this is kind of like compare contrasting to the one in the 250. When they're doing attribution, the images they pull look very similar to the 250. They're not going to take, like, for example, a Goya painting when we have a Goya print. It'll be the same one in the same series that we have from the 250. So it'll look similar. So talk about the piece that it looks like. So even if you didn't know what culture this is, you're like, I recognize the piece a little bit. You can still talk about how it relates to the 250 piece to get those justification points. Last question or questions, depending on the FRQ, using two examples of specific visual and or contextual evidence, explain how the work shown demonstrates its use in a funerary context. Usually this last question is going to tie into the larger content of the piece from the 250. So you can use the one in the 250 to help answer how this one would function or relate to that last question. So don't get tripped up of like, I don't know this piece. Think about what we learned in the 250, and that should help guide you through this. Again, this is one of the harder skills. It's hard to look at something and go like, it's by this person, by this culture, etc. But trust your gut. Don't get super scared. So when I'm looking at this piece immediately, I'm going into that attribution concept. Task 1 is to attribute it to, in this case, a culture. Again, make sure that you're looking, is it culture? Is it artist? Is it time period? Is it art movement, etc.? So in this case, the artwork matches the culture of classical Greece. Now, technically, I could just get this point for saying ancient Greece. I know that it's classical. I'm confident that it's classical because I know it looks like the grave stele of Hegeso. However, if you were like, ooh, I don't know if it's archaic or Hellenistic, you can say ancient Greece, and that improves your odds because ancient Greece would count as the point, archaic Greece would not. So sometimes being too specific can hurt, but you don't want to just be like Mediterranean. That's not helpful. Same concept as like, you can't just say Africa for a mask, right? Doesn't work. So now I got to back up why I think it is classical Greece. So because there are 2 examples that I need to give, that means there are 2 task points. I am comparing this piece to the one in the 250. So I'm going to use firstly and secondly as my sentence starters, and I'm going to state which artwork it is similar to. Even if I don't know the name for certain, I could still get the points. So my example, the artwork is similar to the grave stele of Hegeso. Firstly, both pieces use wet drapery as a technique to emphasize the female form. Boom, I could have gotten the point. I added a little bit just in case for my own brain. The drapery is modeled in order to accentuate the body while keeping it covered. So again, I just need to say wet drapery. Secondly, the female figures are depicted in a naturalistic but idealized manner. Boom, again, I would get the points. I continue talking because that's what I do. The proportions of the body match the mathematical idea of classic Greece. I kept talking about it, so I made sure to talk and justify why I thought it was classical. So that's the only reason I kept talking. Use that visual evidence, so what you can see, to justify why is it that way. So you can look at things like brush strokes, if it's a painting, or the type of print it is, or the media. I could have just said it was marble. They used marble. I could have talked about the architecture designed on this relief. Could have talked about it being a relief. There's a lot of different ideas that I can use that are similar to the one in the 250, even if I wasn't certain what artwork it was. So there's still chance of getting these points, even if you have no idea what you're doing. So make it up and just like keep answering, but don't yap forever because you don't have time, because you still have the last 2 points to get. In this case, the last 2 points are combined into one question. So again, I'm going to use that firstly, secondly, to make sure that I have 2 separate points. So using 2 examples of specific visual and or contextual evidence, explain how the work shown demonstrates its use in a funerary context. Again, this is going to relate this last question to the content of the 250 piece. Sometimes it's like, how does it relate to romanticism or the function of the carving, or how it's a performative work, or blah, 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 blah. It's going to be very specific to the artwork. It's the wild card question because it's not necessarily about attributing anymore, but you can get points without knowing the artwork, right? So because it's a little bit more out there, easier to get these last 2 points than it is to get the first 3. So lock in on these last 2 ones. So this is what I stated. Again, talk too much, but example. This artwork is used in a funerary context similar to the grave stele of Hegeso. I restated the question just to make sure I was on track. Firstly, the large scale of the relief carvings is similar to classic and archaic traditions of using large statues and reliefs to mark graves. This would thus function as a grave marker for the deceased. I'm saying that scale is relevant in being an actual grave marker. So the fact that it is a grave marker is what the funerary context is. So that's the first point, is that it's a grave marker. Secondly, the use of hierarchical scale in the relief carving indicates the important status of the larger female figure. The stele belongs to her and shows off her wealth to have a servant. Hierarchical scale is the second one. So I did contextual evidence grave marker, hierarchical scale, visual evidence as my second one. They're different ideas. They both back up the idea that it's a grave marker, and the hierarchy relates to elite status for the funerary. Could I tie it in more to death? Death as a concept? Absolutely. It is a point that could be wiggly potentially because I'm deviating a bit with the funerary, but because I tied it back into that she had a servant and showing off her wealth, I could have said shows off her wealth in death, and it would have been a stronger point. So be careful again where this last question, you really want to make sure you're following the prompt, right? So attribution. Hard skill, but you can totally make stuff up and get some points. So even if you don't know the piece that it's referencing, focus on those last 2 points, answer things anyway. You can skip it, come back to it when you've done the other FRQs, but you can totally do this. The visuals are the easiest aspects to get correct, but really just chase whatever points you can do. Hopefully you recognize the piece, but don't panic if you don't. Oftentimes, most people don't. So no panic, write anyway. The only way to get 0 points is to not write anything. So good luck on your attribution skill, guys. Don't panic and just keep writing.